Greetings. Welcome to this webinar on remembering past massacres in Latin America and Caribbean, honoring the legacy and resilience of victims. This webinar is brought to you by the Commission of the Churches on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches. The Commission is marking this year its 75th anniversary. Today's webinar will be moderated by the Reverend Gloria Ulloa. She is the World Council of Churches President for Latin America and the Caribbean. She is a pastor of the Presbyterian Church of Colombia, and she has extensive experience in the field of education and in ecumenical participation in Latin America and the Caribbean. She's the president of the Superior Council and of the General Room of the Reformed University. She's a member of the Peace Commission of the Presbyterian Church of Colombia and Executive Secretary of the Presbytery of the Coast. The webinar will be co-facilitated by my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Mikey Roberts. He is the Program Executive for Spiritual Life and Faith in Order at the WCC. In this capacity, he coordinates the daily prayers at the Ecumenical Center and also gives leadership to the musical and spiritual life initiatives for the WCC. Without further delay, I invite Pastora Gloria to guide us in this conversation.
Good morning from Colombia. These drums announced that today will be a session for learning through the stories that we are going to hear. Stories loaded with pain and suffering, because many of these stories have been forgotten. Also internationally. And we want this event to be a conversation. Maybe some of you were expecting a conference, but this is actually a dialogue, a conversation with our panelists. And we are going to try to honor and bring back to our hearts the story of pain and suffering of the communities of Latin America and the Caribbean. We will be focusing in the post-colonial times. And we will be sharing brief experiences of resilience that we have selected. We will also have some musical examples, such as the one with the drums that we have just heard, to help us reflect and connect spiritually. We will be ending on a positive note to celebrate the work that some churches have carried out in support of this resilience and in their efforts for healing these past wounds and fight for a just and fair society.
Buenos dias. And that is all the Spanish I know for today, but so let me at least greet everyone in the language of today's webinar and greet you from Geneva, Switzerland. It is my delight to co-facilitate with Reverend Gloria today our webinar. And let me begin by giving just a synopsis of our speakers who are with us today sharing on the panel. We have first Miss Sarah Sanchez, and she is of Mexican nationality, and she has lived in Brazil for the past 20 years. She is a laywoman and is also a member of the Indigenous Missionary Council. She graduated with a degree in theology from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. And she has worked at the Pastoral Center in San Nicolas de Oriente in Nicaragua. And she did so from 1988 to 1991. She's also worked in Mexico in a similar capacity. And from 2001 to 2021, she has worked as a member of the Indigenous Missionary Council. And we are very delighted that she will be sharing with us today in defense of Indigenous rights and territories and those responsibilities very much close to her line of work. Then we also have with us Dr. Betty Lerma, who holds a degree in Latin American Cultural Studies from UASB based in Quito. She also has a master in political philosophy and a sociology from the Universidad del Valle. She is the director of the research department of the Baptist University for more than 10 years. And as a university professor, she's also based in that institution and in the region. And so we are happy to have her with us. She has been the principal investigator and co-investigator in several projects in the Colombian Pacific region. And she always has a very keen interest in Black and racialized women's projects, situations. So we're very happy to have Dr. Betty with us. Then we also have with us Professor Jessica Barron, who is the Director of the International Relations at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, the St. Augustine campus. She previously lectured at the Mona campus and was the head of the government department or the Department of Government at the Mona campus from 2010 to 2013. She's also been not only based in Mona, as I said, but currently she is based at the St. Augustine campus on the Twin Island. Well, she's on Trinidad. It's a Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Byron has also served as Foreign Service Officer with the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, or we want to say St. Christopher and Nevis, and with the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. And so we're happy to have her with us. She earned her doctorate from the University of Geneva here in Switzerland. And finally, we have with us today as well, Mr. Adolfo Perez Esquivel, who is Argentinian, and he studied at the National School of Fine Arts in Buenos Aires, and also at the National University at La Plata, where he worked for 25 years. And in 1971, he began to get involved in movements in which they were fighting for peace and justice. He founded the newspaper Paz y Justicia, I hope I got that correct, Adolfo, and which soon became the summit of the pacifist movement and the defense of human rights in Latin America. And he also was very influential in the peace and justice ecumenical movement with various Christian groups. And so we are delighted to have these panelists who will be participating and sharing their wealth of information and also their experience and their research with us this day as we go through this webinar with this conversation. So over to you, Reverend Gloria. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Reverend Mikey. So we have heard now the different backgrounds and approaches that we are going to be sharing during these sessions. I will now give you the flow of participation. So first we will hear from Sara Sanchez from Mexico, who will be speaking about the atrocities committed against indigenous peoples in the name of Christianization. After that, we will hear Dr. Betty Ruth Lozano from Colombia on transatlantic trafficking trafficking of slaves. After that, we will hear from Mr. Adolfo Pérez Esquivel from Argentina on the military dictatorships in the south of Latin America up to the 80s. And after that, we will hear Dr. Jessica Barron, who will speak about the massacres in Haiti and the Dominican Republic in 1937. Each panelist will have 7 minutes to present, and we hope that they can make the best use of this time they will be given to share with us their experience and the fruits of their research. So we will now give the floor to Sara Sanchez from Mexico. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. I'm a Mexican national, but I've been living in Brazil for the past 20 years. I live in the Tocantins state, and I'm a member of the Missionary Indigenous Council. We would like to share a bit of the pain and suffering that has been caused oftentimes by our Catholic Church to our Abya Yala peoples. Our story is marked by this sin, and we have been complicit of these massacres committed against the native peoples. I am now speaking about the Brazilian context specifically. We have also experienced native peoples expelled from their territories. And as we know, to Mesoamerican territories, there was the cross and the sword that came to the territories, and with the papal blessing, many times our brothers and sisters in Latin America were destroyed. They also destroyed their cultures and their customs that had been there for thousands and thousands of years in our continent. But today I would like to mention a specific story of the massacre of the Tupinamba people in a context of the general governments. During the colonization in Brazil, there were several capitancies, and there we found 3 models. One, the military conflict where people were expelled from their territories or enslaved, scouted for labor. Then there was a conflict that caused division among the Indians. They were named as hostile Indians, actually, at the time. And mixtures among the different ethnic groups were in clear disadvantage among these indigenous peoples. And third, on the Governor General, whose name was Memdesa, a great work was promoted against the towns of the Bahia and Reconcavo to break the resistance of the Tapuya Indians. The conquests were until 1599 with the pacification of the Poriguara. And from Bahia, they went to the state of Espiritu Santo at the request of a landowner who was bothered by hostile Indians. And then they tried to move on by pacifying the indigenous peoples so that the invading peoples could do it and traveled. we also had the participation of Jesuit fathers who did nothing to prevent this massacre of the Tamoyo Indians of Tupinamba. And without this truce, the Portuguese would have invaded these cultures. The Portuguese fought against the French peoples with the support of some indigenous peoples. And after having expelled them from Rio de Janeiro, the Portuguese became stronger and they broke this truce, this unilateral treaty that they had done with the support of some Indian groups, and they massacred the indigenous peoples. Taking advantage of this ceasefire treaty, this unilateral treaty, the Portuguese perpetrated this massacre against the Tupinamba peoples. The story tells us that the Jesuit fathers did nothing to prevent all this, as we were explaining, even though they were considered their protectors. The justification of the religious people for this complicit attitude was that they were hostile Indians who did not submit to the Portuguese culture or to Christianization. And in this case, the just war could be applied. Another cause of great mortality were the diseases that were brought by Europeans. Many people died of flu, chickenpox, and measles. And during these times, the native peoples of Brazil were massacred, destroyed by this omissive and complicit attitude of our church. A church that became complicit with those who destroyed and fought for the riches of these territories. And this is a sin that we have to recognize, and we need to ask for forgiveness. And I would like to ask for forgiveness for all the indigenous peoples of Brazil, of all the Mesoamerican peoples, because by this way of acting and evangelizing, we contributed to their suffering and the disappearance of their territories, their cultures, their lives. And from our churches, we would like to give our hand to these native people so that they can live and thrive as God would have wanted them to live, with self-determination, and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for this description of the situation of the Tupinamba people. And you illustrated with your knowledge and your wisdom about this mission that the church didn't fulfill at that moment in history. Now we are going to listen to Betty Ruth Lozano from Colombia. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Thank you for organizing this webinar that allows us to remember some facts that usually don't want to be remembered by some people. There are massacres in the past that continue today, and we want to remember one of the greatest massacres in human history, which is the Black Trafficking, which is basically the importing of Africans sequestered from the Western African countries by Portuguese merchants and also by the great majority of European countries. In that time, slavery trafficking is like the oil of that time. Without this trafficking, there would have been an industrial revolution in Europe. In fact, many of the machinery that we enjoyed in the industrial revolution were brought thanks to slavery. 50 million people were lost in the 400 years of slavery. Many of these people were sequestered from their countries, kidnapped, and brought to the other side of the Atlantic. 15 million people is the calculation, but many of them were killed or died either during the kidnapping or when they were traveling to the other side of the world. Therefore, it is said that the Atlantic Sea is one of the biggest graveyards in history. So in the meantime, Europe was getting rich with the slavery, but Africa was being affected by this loss. Men and women in the most productive age were taken to America, which had a disastrous consequence for the agriculture in their country and also to their development. Many of them arrived and died in different plantations because of malnutrition and degrading labor. Africans were treated as exchange objects, just as animals, or even worse. They were also used as reproductive animals. They started working before sunrise and they did so until dawn. Also, women were used as sexual objects by the landlords. The descendants was not respected. They could be sold separately according to the trade laws. One of the most inhuman and degrading legacy of slavery is racism. With the conquering of America, this transatlantic slavery trade, the birth of the imperialist orders, and also the birth of new nation states with a Western ideology that is the framework to give sense to a new way of dominating cultures and languages. This is the situation that gave birth to capitalism. But apart from remembering what we haven't forgotten, we need to reconceptualize all this and reinterpret this and question what really happened. Was it the clash between two words? When the Spanish came to America, they started an intensive exploitation of indigenous labor that provoked in less than 30 years what historians call a demographic disaster. This is not a meeting of two words. We need to recognize that this was a bad encounter between two words. Because of this demographic disaster, the production of gold was reduced significantly, and therefore they decided to also access and use the African slavery instead. We need to consider that all this process implied the production of a new classification and stratification of racial people, and also led to the appropriation of peoples. This is something that is born with the globalization that started with the conquest of America and all the other situations mentioned. This is a domination paradigm that is used in the nation states and imperialist countries. Therefore, we need to remember all this because the racialization of social relationships is nothing from the past, it's still continuing. This happened and started 500 years ago, but it's still undergoing. In most of our countries, we have Afro descendants, and they are all always suffering the harassment from the police, their abuse, and also the killing of these people. There is a war between the Afro descendants and these oppressive forces of the state. The number of young people killed every day in Cali, for instance, in the city where I live, is a constant that many people are not aware of. And when this is known, this is justified as a problem of violence and crime. This is the other phase of the profiling of the police. In 2020, several youngsters went out of their houses to play nearby in a place where there were some crops and there were also some rivers. At the end of the afternoon, the families got worried because they couldn't find them, and they found them brutally killed with a lot of torture signals. The families said that close to this place, there were 2 police patrols and also some private security officers that had really big machetes in their hands, and they were stained with blood. This happened in Cali, in Huerque, where there are more than 4,000 Afro-descendant families that came displaced from the Pacific area, escaping armed conflict. And this was brought to the public sphere. Around 200 young people were killed in this area in the last year. These neighborhoods in Cali have the highest crimes rates in the country. Therefore, the massacre of African descendants is not something from the past, but it continues today. Thank you. Yes, Betty Ruth, thank you very much for bringing to our memory this problem and how these models of classification and production that capitalist order presents are being perpetuated in Latin America and the Caribbean and also in the rest of the world. And you also invite us to rethink and reinterpret this past so that the peace of God can be the reality. Thank you so much, Betty Ruth. Now we will listen to Mr. Adolfo Pérez Esquivel from Argentina. He is going to speak about the Latin American dictatorships in the 60s, 70s, and 80s of last century. Thank you, Esquivel.
This technology makes us become crazy sometimes. I'm very happy to be here with you and grateful for this invitation. I am going to try to synthesize my presentation. I have been listening to the previous panelists and speaking about Latin America, we would have to mention that from the times of the conquest, more than 70 million indigenous peoples, women and men, have been victims of the mercifulness of great economic interests from those days until today. But I have been specifically asked to speak about the great massacres in Latin America. And this Latin American massacre is the greatest massacre of humanity. In our continent, as Betty Ruth was mentioning, we have had slavery. Slaves were used in mining to extract gold and silver and to steal the existent riches. The colonizers took everything and they left us with nothing. But this doesn't happen for nothing. Dictatorships are the fruit of imposed politics. Sorry, we have a problem, a sound problem. So I would like to speak about one of the massacres that has affected Argentina the most. After the Cuban Revolution in the year 59, the United States developed the National Security Doctrine, which imposed some mechanisms in order not to lose their hegemonic power over a continent that was always considered as their backyard, their courtyard. This also has to do with the Western-Eastern conflict in the world after Second World War. The United States created the School of Americas in Panama, and the military academics that were attended by thousands of Latin American military to be trained on national security. So this powered the conflict. There was an internal enemy for religious people, for different sectors of society, and a regime of terror was imposed. People were disappearing. This was not something new. They learned this from the French forces during the war in Argelia, and they tried to prevent liberation. They didn't want Cuba, for instance, to have national sovereignty. They wanted to have influence over their territory. So during the 70s and 80s, we have the military coup in Brazil in the year 64 with the superior military school, and some countries did not have borders, so the same groups were operating in different territories, different military squads. For instance, the murdering groups of Pinochet, groups in Europe, in the United States, and in Latin America. And this is the cause for torture and for children who were kidnapped and who disappeared. This also has to do with the civil war in Spain and military figures who kidnapped children and gave them to other families so that they didn't receive the influence of their parents regarding their ideologies. So if we analyze the Latin American context, these realities are true still today. We could look at the case of Colombia. In Colombia, there is a democratic government, supposedly, but the people experience torture, kidnapping, and different kinds of violence. There are more than 8 million internally displaced peoples. There is the question with the Cauca, with the native peoples, but we should also mention Brazil with favelas, with prosecutions and different kind of aggressions. In Paraguay, 2 Argentinian girls recently disappeared. They were 11 years old. And in Colombia, they are trained for war to justify this confrontation perpetrated with 11-year-old children. There was the case of another girl named Luchita, who was 15 years old too. These are recent cases, and memory helps us understand our present. This is the reality we are living in. The current coup d'etat And now this coup do not need the military presence. There is the coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia, the coup against Dilma Rousseff in Brazil to expel her and prevent Lula from being a candidate once more to Brazil's presidency. And I would like to emphasize the coup in Honduras against Manuel Zelaya, who was taken out of his own bed and expelled out of the country. We have the case of Fernando Lula in Paraguay too, and the blockade to Cuba, to Venezuela, the situation in Nicaragua. So we have this very difficult landscape in Latin America. Today, a different kind of coup is perpetrated, lawfare or law war, that has been applied to all this kind of military or non-military coups that I have been speaking about. Now I just have 2 more minutes, but I would like to speak about the mechanisms to dominate and subdue people and relegate them to marginality, to the margins, and hunger. And hunger is a crime, and this is our eternal debt, our eternal external debt applied by institutions such as the World Bank and others. This is the summary of the situation. Now, speaking from the church's viewpoint, there is everything from the Catholic Church to evangelical churches. We have been working very closely with both Catholic and evangelical churches, with the Methodist Church and Lutheran Church. And during these military coups, there was a lot of ecumenical solidarity. The World Council of Churches also helped our peoples with their permanent presence during these conflicts. And I believe that this was a salvific presence that counteracts other religious personalities who were aligned with dictatorships, and this was something terrible, of course, but this is our reality. There is a lot of resilience in all the peoples from Haiti to Brazil to Argentina. In Argentina, we have the movement of the mothers, like the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo and other movements for human rights. So as an Argentinian singer says, not everything is lost. So this would be the summary of our situation, but there is the hope to work for a new horizon and a new beginning. Thank you. Thank you very much for this amazing and impressive summary with the wish for riches and the greed of some peoples that destroy other people's possibilities to enjoy their human rights and their rights as peoples.
And we can listen now to Dr. Jessica Barron. She would speak about the massacres of Haitians in Dominican Republic. You have the floor, Professor. Good morning and greetings to you all, panelists and all the people that are listening. I am very grateful to have been invited to this event, also because I am from the Caribbean region, but not from the countries and communities involved in this event. But I would like to speak in English now for the rest of my comments.
On October the 2nd, 1937, ordered by the President of the Dominican Republic, General Rafael Trujillo, the Dominicano military began attacking, expelling, and killing Haitians and Dominicanos of Haitian descent who were living in areas of the northwest of the Dominican Republic that bordered on the frontier with Haiti. People were also killed in other areas further east. People were killed largely with cutlasses, machetes, but also some with guns. And the attacks and expulsions went on for about 2 weeks at that time. This event is known as El Corte, the cutting. There are wide-ranging very variable estimations of the numbers of people killed, ranging from 4,000 to at least 20,000 people, of men, women, and children. Bodies were burned or buried in unmarked graves. Many of these have never been found. This event is described by Edward Paulino, a Dominicano historian, as one of the largest 20th century mass killings of people of African descent in the Americas. Thousands more people fled across the borders into Haiti and forever lost their homes and their possessions. Trujillo's order was given on the pretext that Haitian residents were attacking Dominicanos and raiding their farms and their cattle ranches. But it is believed that he wanted to purge the area of its Haitian presence, that this was the real reason. Following the massacre and the forced removals, the Trujillo government set about changing place names and repopulating the abandoned Haitian districts with Dominicanos and constructing nationalist monuments in many areas. Now, Trujillo's government denied any official involvement in the killings. They said it was spontaneous uprisings, and they went to great lengths to silence reports and any form of commemoration of this event. So there was a shroud of silence but societal guilt surrounding this event for over 70 years, but it lives on in both Haitian and Dominicano memory. Now, the US ambassador at the time sent a report to President Roosevelt about a systematic campaign of extermination of Haitian residents in the Dominican Republic conducted by the National Police and the Army. But although there were arrests and a sort of trial, no one was ever sentenced and all those arrested were later freed. As a result of US pressure and reparation claims from the Haitian government, the Dominican Republic paid about $500,000 US, said to be approximately 9.5 million in today's values, in 1938. But much of this money did not reach its intended recipients, the dispossessed and the destitute, struggling to survive back in Haiti, although some was used for resettlement, but a small portion. A colleague of mine from the Dominican Republic refers to the impact and legacy of two corrupt, incompetent, and brutal governments on the lives and the futures of Haitian and Dominicano citizens. Now, what were the causes of this massacre? One was the fact that you had a very authoritarian and brutal government in the Dominican Republic, Trujillo's anti-Haitian racist ideology, and his use of the killings as a strategy, not only as a means of removing the Haitians, but also of strengthening his hold over distant rural territories and controlling the power of local authorities in those areas of the Dominican Republic. Second, the depressed economic and social conditions during the Depression years in the Dominican Republic. This was not the only place where you had massacres at that time. There was a very notable massacre in El Salvador around the same period. There was also the presence of large-scale Haitian migration, encouraged by US investors as recruitment into sugar production as of the 1920s. This was a solution to their search for cheap labor. There had been struggles since the late 19th century between traditional cattle economy in this area of the Dominican Republic and rising sugar cultivation in these areas. Trujillo wished to contain the Haitian presence only to the sugar plantations. And there was widespread enforced use of ID documents that were issued annually, which stated both people's skin color and their place of residence in order to track the population and to contain the Haitians as highly exploited, cheap labor on sugar estates. Now, another cause was the complex history of the Dominican Republic and the Haitian Revolution, and the fact that under President Jean-Pierre Boyer in Haiti between 1822 and 1844, Haiti, concerned about its own security, invaded the Dominican Republic and reunified Hispaniola, exercised very authoritarian and brutal rule in the Dominican Republic, characterized by seizure of property and extractive taxation. Now, Boyer's government fell in 1843, and in 1844, with Venezuelan support, the Dominican Republic expelled the Haitian presence from its territory. And they have always regarded this as the real independence of the Dominican Republic, their liberation from that very unfortunate period of Haitian occupation. The legacy of this history is that Dominican Republic, many people in the Dominican Republic, even today, they define their national identity in opposition to Haiti. Dominican society became even more receptive to narratives of Haitian cultural, racial, and physical invasions. And the Dominican Republic projected itself as a society with a different ethnic heritage, and successive elites in the Dominican Republic have legitimized themselves with this mission to preserve the integrity and the sovereignty of the Dominican Republic from the Haitian threat. Haiti was viewed as backward, chaotic, poverty-stricken, Afro-Caribbean society, which while the Dominican Republic had its mission to modernize, to preserve its Hispanic European identity, and to pursue economic progress. This is the narrative. This was the discourse underlying a lot of what has happened, a lot of attitudes have been very much influenced by this very negative discourse. Paradoxically, Haitian pool of cheap labor has continued to play a vital role in wealth creation in the Dominican Republic. And the Dominican Republic and Haiti continue to share the space of one island. Inevitably, they have experienced the growth of fluid borderland communities, where communities engage in regular social, commercial, and cultural exchanges and move freely back and forth across the frontiers. The unstable and authoritarian political histories of both states, the oppression and the poverty of the peasantry in both countries, and the interests and policies of external actors, notably of the United States, officials and investors, have driven migration flows from Haiti into the Dominican Republic. from the late 1800s until the present day. It's estimated that there are about 2 million plus Haitians in the Dominican, people of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic today. About 1 million of those are Dominicanos of Haitian descent. And since the early 21st century, there has been another Dominicano drive, government drive, to limit the Haitian presence and to denationalize hundreds of thousands of Dominicanos of Haitian ancestry by changing the nationality laws and policies of the Dominican Republic. People of Haitian descent have continued over the last 10 years to experience state-based violence and expulsion from the Dominican Republic, and to be stripped of their rights within their own society. So the legacies of the massacre of 1937 are manifold. The legacies include the hardening of an anti-Haitian doctrine and sentiment in the Dominican Republic, often state-sponsored, and the legacy of Haitian descendants include exclusion and statelessness in the Dominican Republic. So I will stop there. I would just like to say, though, that there is also a legacy of solidarity and of working together amongst some segments in both societies and in their diasporas, particularly in North America and in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a ti, querida.
Thank you,
amiga
dear friend
y todo este
Jessica,
recorrido que hemos hecho en
for
estos tiempos tan difíciles en una isla
all
tan
this
preciosa.
overview of these difficult times in such a beautiful island that Haiti and the Dominican Republic do share. And they have had so many problems to live together due to this domination strategy, the quest for domination of territories for their own interests, while not favoring life and cohabitation, peaceful cohabitation of these two peoples. So, and in the midst of all this suffering, we need to continue praying and reflecting. So, dear Mikey, could you please lead us through this prayer?
Gracias. Let us pray. God, who comforts all people with the comfort of your Holy Spirit's presence, we thank you today that you have never abandoned your people, that your love for us knows no limit, that your mercy for us and your grace is multiplied each day in our lives. As we recall today these massacres, as we look back and remember, we ask that your comforting grace will be among your people today, so that even in this time and in this age, we will continue to be strengthened by you, to continue to work for justice, for liberty, and continuing to ensure that all humanity indeed reflects your glory. And so be with your people, especially those in Latin America and the Caribbean, as we today remember, as we today recall, and as we today again receive your comfort. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We are going to have some minutes to reflect as the WCC, as churches, and also as organizations working for life in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have many questions when we think about all these difficult situations that were suffered and that we still suffer today, as the panelists had explained. We wonder, for instance, what can we say today so that these massacres do not continue destroying us and help us to heal? What are the lessons we need to learn about these past massacres? How do we ensure that future generations can learn from these past and that history does not repeat itself? We would like our panelists to help us reflect upon these questions. How do we remember these heroes that were fallen in the different countries? How can we prevent these heroes from being forgotten? How do we commemorate and celebrate their memory? Are the monuments enough for this? What about the remedy of people's descending from these heroes? Has there been reparation and remedy? I would like to invite our four panelists so they can maybe give some answers to these questions. They can use around 3 to 5 minutes each. Maybe we could start with Betty Ruth. Betty, please, you have the floor. Thank you, Pastor Gloria. I would like to speak about reparation, about remedies, the last questions. As Abuelo Zenon said, and as Juan Garcia said, the leader of the Afro-Ecuadorian movement, Afro-descendants, we have repaired ourselves. There has never been reparation and remedy on behalf of the state or the churches. The independence since the beginning of the 19th century changed nothing in terms of the domination paradigm. The Creole elites were benefiting, and when in Colombia there was independence from Spain, only 40 years after, the abolition of slavery was declared in 1851. This was being promised by different persons. Therefore, many historians believe that the abolition of slavery happens because it's not economically viable. Others think that most of the peoples that were enslaved had reached their freedom through different means. That means they self-emancipated, working on free time to pay their freedom. Women paid the freedom of their sons and daughters and husbands, and this was something very important in terms of the role of women. Therefore, in our case, was self-reparation. Afro-descendants and Black people repair ourselves. Afro-descendant people that occupied some places in Colombia, far from the influence of the main state influence, created new environments where the community was the norm. Unfortunately, all these relationship network that was community-based has started to be broken because of the impact of armed conflict upon these people. This conflict is trying to expel them from the territories they occupied during centuries, to build mega projects at a transnational level and national level too. So therefore, Afro-descendants are still suffering a systemic violence that is trying to expel them from their territories. Therefore, I believe reparations and remedy has not been given by the state. Therefore, from the church, we expect a more important role where the church can try to repair the situation or contribute to repair this situation that is still present nowadays. Churches, as Dr. Eva Karupest said in a meeting we had in Japan, churches have their hands covered in blood and they try to give the voice of the Lord in the community, but they are silencing the voices of those who murdered. Therefore, there's still a lot to be done. Thank you, my dear Betty, Ruth. Now I would like to listen to Adolfo Pérez Esquivel with some of these answers. Well, all these questions are interrelated, I believe. We have been asking in Argentina many things. Ordinary justice has tried to find truth, justice, and remedy from the times of the dictatorships in Argentina. This has been done and it's ongoing at this very moment. We have some crimes against humanity trials going on because people's disappearance do not prescribe, legally speaking. Therefore, the justice is acting every day. Another thing is to strengthen the International Criminal Court at the international level and the Rome statutes. And within our countries, we need to work towards participatory democracy, democracies where there is a bigger representation. Nowadays, people give all the power to the people represented at the political level, but these people then do whatever they want. Therefore, the current model is not valid anymore. There is a lot of discrimination. Democracy is not a gift, it's something we need to build. And only when the people can participate at the cultural, spiritual, and political level, this can be done. The role of churches at the ecumenical level is so crucial to face in an ethical way and with values and with education this situation. Education should be the practice of freedoms. When we look back and we talk about memory so much, it's not because we want to be in the past, it's because we need to build upon the present. Only through the present we can build a life, but we need to look back for that. Social participation and the education as the practice of freedoms and justice, so we don't have to suffer again the things we suffered, the terror, the persecutions and killings. Nowadays, Colombia is undergoing a very difficult situation. It is a genocide what is happening. And the Colombian case is something that impacts all the Latin American continent. Another thing to be considered is the continental unity to be able to face all this, because none of the countries can act alone. None of us alone can get out of these patriotic issues alone. This is a challenge, but I do believe that social, cultural, political, and religious engagement of peoples are the solution to prevent this from happening again. Thank you. Thank you, Adolfo. Dr. Jessica Barron, what do you think about all this?
Well, the question that I can see in the chat that I could say something about is the one, what is the role or memory and remembering well in order to break the domination paradigm within countries and among countries. Let me see what else it says. Anyway, it seems to be to what extent if I understand correctly, the questioner is asking, what can be done in terms of promoting greater consciousness of history and using it to build a better present and future?
Dr. Byron, let me also add, there's a part of that question that is very key that you probably didn't see, and it says,
no, I'm not seeing it properly.
The part that you have to weigh in as well, especially the interfering role of the USA in the Caribbean and Latin America.
The end of it. Yes, yes.
That interfering question, part of the question is also key.
Well, I think these are realities that are going to continue to be there. Whether we like it or not, the United States is always going to be a very large presence, and certainly not in many cases. If I look at the case of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and if I look at many other situations in the Caribbean, the United States interests very often do not reflect, their strategic interests do not reflect the interests of Caribbean people, Caribbean societies, but there is a huge difference in power. But what does one do in cases like that? I think there are three responses that are very important. The first thing is that there's a lot of ignorance among ourselves. There's tremendous ignorance within the Caribbean, partly because we are islands, partly because there are linguistic divisions across the Caribbean. And so we do not seek to know enough to understand other people's history, other people's situations, even within our own region. And so there are, for example, I would doubt that there are many communities within the Caribbean that are entirely up to date on the Haitian Dominicano situation or about this massacre that occurred in 1937. It is taught now in the history books in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but it is not referred to, it's not a major part of the teaching of history within the English-speaking Caribbean or the French-speaking Caribbean. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of raising our consciousness, our awareness about the situations of other countries within our region and how we can play a positive role in building solidarity and providing responses at the level of civil society. Of course, the churches have a major role to play in that. Increasingly in the Caribbean, we have, we move, there's a lot of regional mobility. In much of the Eastern Caribbean, there are communities from the Dominican Republic and there are communities from Haiti also. They seem to relate fairly well to one another. They are in similar situations of being migrant communities, although they probably, and they have somewhat different rights. Some are CARICOM, members of the CARICOM community, that would be Haitians. And in the case of the people from the Dominican Republic, those who are in other Caribbean societies are often descendants of our people who migrated to the Dominican Republic at the start of the 20th century. But it is a fantastic opportunity for our societies to acquire more understanding of the multiple experiences of Caribbean people and how we can be much more engaged with supporting one another. As far as the United States is concerned, we also have diasporas, we have civil society channels such as the church. And these are channels through which we can engage with actors within the United States and through which we can promote our perspectives, our interests, and promote resistance to the most negative aspects, the most negative repercussions of some major power interests in our regions. It's very complicated because of globalization, because of mobility. We are as implicated within the United States as the United States is within our societies. And it requires a lot of agility and a lot of wisdom to build alliances and to try to build constructive rather than destructive partnerships. I don't know what help that is. But I think I think the main point is that charity begins at home, and we need much more solidarity amongst ourselves and much more learning about our own Caribbean and Latin American society before we go any further. We need to start there and have more concrete action to support one another.
Thank you, dear Jessica, for these perspectives. And now we are going to hear the perspectives from Brazil, from Sara Sanchez, about her experience with the Indigenous Missionary Council. I would just like to try to come back and take up some of the questions asked to the other panelists for concerning the memories of martyrs and heroes from the battles. And I would like to bring the memory of someone who was murdered during the colonization, the Portuguese and Spanish colonizations, the memory also from a victim who was murdered during the war in 1986, of someone who was considered a leader, a great chief, and he was fighting for his land. And he shouted, "This land is already owned by someone," because the Madrid Treaty stated that the territories of the peoples of the 7 nations would be given to Spain, would belong to Spain. So he rebelled against this question and he fought for his land. So currently, indigenous peoples have the same claims over their lands. And I believe that redress that could be provided to the peoples in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in Brazil, would consist of the restitution of these territories that were stolen from them and that are still being occupied by big domination projects, agribusiness, oil extraction enterprises, projects that destroy nature and the habitats and cultures of the peoples who are expelled out of their own territories. So it is not enough with building monuments and memorials. There is a monument to this hero I was speaking about, and also a memorial after 50 years of his murder, and several peoples coming from Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay came to remember this great leader and his fight for our territories. this fight for the land that is now a big challenge in Brazil for the indigenous peoples. It is a symbol of resilience for the peoples to fight for their territories. This fight for the territories is inspired by the story of this hero of war. Inspiration for the peoples who are currently threatened, whose territories are threatened, and who have the original rights over the lands. And this great leader has been mentioned to be able to share this story of rebellion so that the indigenous peoples can fight against this time frame. It is an anti-constitutional thesis against the indigenous people's rights, and if this law is approved in the Supreme Courts of Brazil, it would only increase the genocide of the indigenous peoples. So I believe that what Professor Adolfo Pérez-Esquivel was saying is very important. The lesser of these peoples have to create alliances. We have to become allies against our common enemy. And I would like to underline our hopes against these forces and powers that want to destroy our nature, our God-given nature. The indigenous peoples believe the land is their mother earth. And this is why we have to continue fighting. Two perspectives to give us hope, especially are the youth of the indigenous peoples and also the women in these native peoples, who are essential with their rights, with their strength, with their knowledge, with the training they are getting also at universities, to be able to defend their territories at the same level as these forces who are trying to impose over our peoples. It is very important to recover these living forces, these current living forces that we have to try to fight against our destroyed lands while recognizing the sacredness of these territories that are recognized by the original and native peoples. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Sarah, because this claim, this fight for the land is still the same claim and fight of Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, LGBTI communities, impoverished communities. This is still our fight and our claim. So thank you for this call to action and to continue working, continue getting educated against the ignorance of our peoples. It is very important. Also what Adolfo Pérez-Esquivel was saying, education is very important so that keeping our memories alive allows us not to repeat these same situations, these same atrocities. Justice also comes at play if we become allies to lobby for our rights. Then justice will be realized. And thank you for this call that states that each community has to fight for our own redress, for our own remedies, but we need to create alliances to reach this redress, even if we are successful only in some of our efforts. We need to continue fighting for this redress. We have some questions now through the chat. Thank you also for sharing about this hero of war, Sepe, Tiaraju, dear Sarah. And now we will try to take up some of these questions from the chat.
Thank you, Gloria. Professor Byron has already done one of the questions, and one of the things that I want to pick up, and this question goes for Professor Perez, and I would imagine as a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, Professor Perez, the question that comes from Carolina to you is, she says, I would like to ask about the implications of Catholic nationalism in the military dictatorship in Argentina. So I don't know if, did you hear the question, Professor Perez?
Sí, hubo sectores.
Yes, so some sectors during the dictatorship, some church sectors supported the military decisions. Not all happened like this. The Catholic elite, so one part of this Catholic elite supported the dictatorship because they thought this is the fight against international communism. At a given moment, I met Captain Adolfo Silingo, who expelled from planes 30 prisoners, and the justification from the military sectors was that this was a dignified death for saving the country from the war of international communism. So indeed, there was a presence of some parts of the Catholic elite in the military dictatorship, but there were some sectors who opposed and fought against dictatorship. We also find some martyrs, such as Monsignor Angelelli, a bishop from La Rioja who was martyred during the dictatorship, and also Monsignor Ponce de Leon. His role is still under investigation. And there was also the role of many priests and nuns who gave their lives for the cause. And it is not only the role of the Catholic Church, but also of evangelical churches, such as López de Mendoza, a pastor from the Methodist Church. There were others who even came to justify torture while trying to justify the military dictatorship. Sorry, the video has frozen. Yes. So there were also the Crusades with the Holy War, and we can make also the parallelism here. There were many dark spots and many lights during these times. There were many religious people from different church families, Catholic, evangelical churches, and also the Jewish community. There is, for instance, Rabbi Marshall Mayer, who worked with us, actually. And he was a man who fought against the dictatorship, and eventually he had to leave the country because of this. So when we try to analyze the role of the churches, we can realize all these dynamics. There was also a priest who was condemned to life sentence because he was said to show complicity during military dictatorship. So these are some of the examples I can share. Thank you very much, Adolfo. for bringing us these perspectives and this important reflection. Our peoples need to be updated and alive in action. We are reaching now the end of this webinar, so I would only say thank you, be grateful, but also say that we need to be engaged for life, to defend people and to defend the most vulnerable communities, the victims of these massacres, people who have been made vulnerable by power, by pain, by historical anguish that we have been carrying through history. In what has been described by our 4 panelists this morning. Thank you, Betty, Ruth, Adolfo, Jessica, Sarah. Thank you very much for bringing back these memories to our hearts, these difficult moments that we have experienced in Latin America and in the Caribbean, but also our hope to be able to continue working for our communities. Now, we would like to pray a powerful prayer. God of life, lead us to your justice and to your peace, so that our Latin America, our Afro-America, our Indigenous America, our diverse territories of America, our America that fights, our youth and our women can be taken care of by your Holy Spirit, your life-giving Spirit, this divinity in movement in all the spaces of our planet Earth. Please lead us to justice and peace. Amen. Many thanks to all the people who have attended this webinar today and who have shared these experiences. And we hope that our engagement can be strengthened more and more for the fight for our human rights. Many blessings upon all of you in this day. Thank you.